Well, somehow it's already that time of the month where I share with you guys all the books that I read. And I read quite a bit, so we're just going to dive right in. The first book that I read this month was The Spanish Love Deception. This book follows Catalina and Aaron. Catalina is single and she needs a date to her sister's wedding. She does not want to show up without a date because her whole family is going to judge her for that. They already think that she's going to be single for the rest of her life based on how badly her last relationship ended, and she hasn't really dated anyone else since then. But then her colleague Aaron, who she despises, offers a solution to her problem. He offers to pretend to be her boyfriend so they can go to her sister's wedding in Spain together. Catalina is very hesitant. She doesn't trust Aaron. She's like, what is your motive? Why do you want to help me if you hate me so much? But because she's desperate, Catalina accepts and they fly to Spain together. Throughout their trip, they realize that they may have more feelings for one another than they originally thought. This was such a cute little rom-com. I know that a lot of people thought this was a slow book. It is a little bit slow in the beginning. It does take a little bit to get to the point of the story, but I enjoyed it. It reminded me a lot of The Love Hypothesis, which I absolutely love that book. I think I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars because of the Spanish influences throughout the book. I love the Spanish sayings. I love the Spain scenery. It had the right amount of comedy, the right amount of spice. I loved all the characters except for one, which was Catalina's ex, but I loved Catalina. She was independent, she was intelligent, feisty, a little bit too stubborn, but honestly, I'm stubborn, so I can relate. I loved her family, her best friend. All the characters were so freaking cute, and I just loved Catalina and Aaron together. Freaking adorable. So I highly recommend that if you're into rom-coms, give it a try. I finished this in one sitting because I did not want to put it down. Alright, so the next 3 books that I read are actually all part of a series, and it is the Selection series. So I read the first 3 books. I did not read the other books in the series. I forget how many there are. 6 books in the series? But I'm not really interested in reading the other ones because I don't think that it follows the same characters as the first 3 books. The first 3 books are The Selection, The Elite, and The One. I'm not going to tell you what the second and third book are about because it'll ruin the plot, but I'll tell you what the first book is about. It's basically about a competition. Kind of reminds me of The Bachelor, where 35 girls compete for the heart of Prince Maxon. Not only are they competing for the heart of Prince Maxon, but they're also competing to become the next princess, so they're competing for the crown essentially. This is a dystopian young adult romance, and it's pretty old. I think this came out a while ago. The Selection came out in 2012. That was actually the year I graduated high school. I think that I would have loved this series a lot more had I read it in 2012. I still enjoyed reading it now, but I did have a lot of issues with the main character, America. For the first 2 books, I could not stand this girl. I just found her to be so hypocritical. She was getting mad at Prince Maxon for the same things that she was doing behind his back. At least Prince Maxon was honest with her. I feel like he deserved way better than America. That's just my opinion. I mean, I didn't hate her character entirely. I like that she stood up for herself and she stood up for people who needed help. I really enjoyed that aspect of her character, but I really hated how she acted on impulse. I understand I think she's like 17 in this book, maybe a little bit younger, a little bit older, I don't remember exactly. Her being rude in certain parts to Prince Maxon for no reason just really turned me off. She did redeem herself a little bit in the third book for me. Definitely a guilty pleasure type of series. Like, there isn't much to it, but I found myself not wanting to put these books down. I felt like I was eating junk food. You know when something is not that great, but you keep doing it? That's how I felt reading these books. Like, I was getting so angry at America, and then Prince Maxon would come in and I would be like, oh my god, I love him so much. I gave the first 2 books 2 out of 5 stars, and then the third book I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars because I really did enjoy this one the most. It really redeemed the series for me. The first book, The Selection, is a lot slower. It does a lot of world building. It sets the scene, so don't expect a lot of action or a lot of plot for the first one. When it ended, I was like, oh, this is how the series is going to go. Quite slow, but it does pick up in the second book and then definitely picks up in the third book. Overall, a good series. If you want to pass the time and read these, go ahead. If you're into dystopian romances, go ahead. The next book that I read this month was A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. I didn't even tell you guys the authors of the first couple books I showed you. I'll have them on the screen. So sorry. This is the second book in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. I'm not going to tell you guys what this book is about because I don't want to ruin the first book for you in case you haven't read that one. A lot of you guys told me that the second book is way better than the first. I have to agree. The first book, A Court of Thorns and Roses, is a lot slower compared to this book. I still really much enjoyed that book. Absolutely love it. But I know that a lot of people didn't like it because of how slow it was and how all the action happened towards the end of the book. This one is a lot more fast paced. Your mind is going to be blown. Everything that you learned in the first book is completely shattered in this one. So keep that in mind. My heart hurt a lot during this book, if I'm being honest, but I absolutely loved it. I loved the writing. I loved all the characters, even the bad guys. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Highly recommend. If you read A Court of Thorns and Roses and you didn't really like it, I would say give the second book a chance to try to get into the series because this one is a lot more fast paced. I do have a reading vlog featuring the first 2 books in the series. So if you want to check that out, I'll have it linked down below for you. Another book that I read this month was Neon Gods by Katie Robert. This is basically a Greek mythology retelling of Persephone and Hades. This book follows Persephone, who is a young adult. Her dream is to get out of Olympus, but her mother forces her to get engaged to Zeus. Persephone does not want to get engaged to Zeus. She cannot stand him. He's a notorious leader. So she flees to the lower side of Olympus where she meets Hades. Once they meet, they decide to form an alliance because they both share their common hatred for Zeus. They end up falling for one another even though they're not supposed to. I enjoyed this book. My only thing is that this book had a lot of spiciness. Now, I'm not one to not like spicy scenes in a romance novel, but I felt like the spiciness in this book overpowered the whole plot and overpowered the main character's love story. I don't know if that was intentional by the author. Also, this book took a lot of inspiration from the 50 Shades of Grey series. I know that that series gets a lot of hate. You probably will not trust any of my reviews after I admit this, but I actually enjoyed the 50 Shades of Grey series. I actually enjoyed the series told from Christian Grey's perspective more. I know that series gets a lot of hate, but I actually enjoyed the books. Sorry. I noticed that there was a lot of things that the author took from that series. To me, it seemed like she was forcing the spicy scenes. Like, I wanted more of their love story. So if you're into spiciness and you don't really care about the plot itself, then read this book. You'll love it. But if you want a good balance of spiciness and romance, then you may feel the same type of way I did when I read this book. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. Honestly, I thought it was meh. So that was not the only Greek retelling I read this month. I read a second book, which is called A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. This one follows Hades and Persephone yet again. In this book, Persephone is the goddess of spring, but by title only. Everything she touches actually dies instead of coming to life. And Hades is the god of the dead, but he has built a gambling empire in the mortal world. One night, Persephone goes to one of Hades' nightclubs, and without realizing it, she ends up in a contract with God of the Dead. Basically, she has to create life in the underworld in order to gain her freedom. If she doesn't create life in the underworld, she will be Hades' prisoner for eternity. This is the first book in the series, and I know that the author has this exact same series, just told by Hades' perspective. I enjoyed this book, but I think I only enjoyed it because of Hades. I absolutely loved his character. I'm really contemplating reading the rest of the series solely from Hades' perspective because Persephone is really annoying. Let me read a paragraph from this book so you guys can understand how annoying her character is. This is Hades arguing with Persephone. I'm beginning to think you don't know anything. I'm beginning to understand that you don't even think for yourself. How dare I what, Persephone? Call out your bullshit? You act so powerless, but you've never made a damn decision for yourself. Will you let your mother determine who you fuck now? That pretty much sums up Persephone in this book. I hate when females in books are so whiny. They complain about everything. All she does is put herself in these bad situations and she blames everyone else except for herself. I cannot stand a character who does not take accountability for their own actions. Heck, I can't even stand a person in real life who does that. And I found myself skipping to the parts where she was with Hades, because at least when she was with Hades, she was a lot more bearable for me. So I really enjoy the plot. I just did not enjoy Persephone's character. For that reason, I think that I'm going to continue reading the series, but I'm going to pick up the books told from Hades' perspective. So I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars. If you're into Greek mythology, then I think you would enjoy this book. The cover though, absolutely stunning. The next book that I read was The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary. This book follows Tiffy and Leon. They share an apartment, but they've actually never met. Since Tiffy works during the day, a 9 to 5, she has the apartment to herself during the night. And since Leon works overnight, he has the apartment to himself during the day. They start leaving little post-it notes for one another. At first, the notes are basically like little roommate reminders, like take out the trash. And then the notes evolve into full-on conversations, deep conversations that they have. They end up realizing that they're falling for one another despite not ever meeting in person. I thought that this was a really cute book. I loved the idea of the plot. I think the plot is super unique. That's actually what made me pick up this book in the first place, aside from the stunning cover, because this cover is absolutely gorgeous. One thing that I really liked about this book is that it's told from Leon's and Tiffy's point of view. I really like that we got to know each character's story and understand why they were the way that they were. However, one thing I didn't like was how Leon's point of view was written. It was really weird. Is it third person? It took me a while to get used to how his story was being written, and that kind of like threw me off. So I didn't enjoy that aspect at all, but I did enjoy the format. I like that the book was broken down by months. Like you start off the book in February and then you end the book in September, but 2 years later. I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars, mainly because it's a super slow read. And then the ending came and it was so abrupt that it kind of just felt flat for me. It was a good little read, but nothing spectacular. I feel like that is the theme for this wrap up. I read a lot of books that were just okay. They didn't really blow me away, except for maybe like 1 or 2. Speaking of a book that didn't blow me away, The Goal by Elle Kennedy. I wanted to love this book, you guys, because I'm a huge fan of the off-campus series, but I just couldn't get into this book, if I'm being honest. I didn't even finish it. I got halfway. I have a little receipt as my bookmark. I got halfway. This book follows college students Sabrina and Tucker. I absolutely love Tucker. He is such a gentleman, such a breath of fresh air, especially when all the other off-campus books, the male characters were players before they fell in love. I mean, he still gets around, don't get me wrong, but he treats girls with actual respect, and I appreciate that. I love that. Sabrina, on the other hand, like, I like her character because she's driven, she knows what she wants, and she goes after it. She's super intelligent. She got into Harvard Law. Hello, props to her. I just didn't like how she treated Tucker, especially when he was just trying to be nice and be supportive. She pushed him away a lot, and I don't know, I just didn't really click with their romance. It wasn't a vibe for me. This book has a surprise pregnancy trope, and I'm not really into those. And maybe that's why I wasn't invested in this book. I don't know, I just couldn't relate. I don't know if relate's the right word. I just couldn't get into their romance. So this is definitely my least favorite book in the series. I feel like the books in the series get progressively worse. The first book was absolutely the best one, The Deal, that features Hannah and Garrett's relationship. The second book, if I remember correctly, follows Grace and Logan. I enjoyed that book. I thought it was a really cute love story. Not as good as the first one, but still good. The third book follows Dean, which I love Dean's character, and Allie. Again, not great, but still a good read. And then we have Tucker and Sabrina in this book, and I just, again, couldn't bother to finish this book. I walked away from it. I don't even know what I would rate it. I probably would give it like a 2 out of 5 5 stars, and I'm being generous because I really enjoyed Tucker's character. The final book in the series is The Legacy. So you get all 4 couples 3 years after they graduate college. I don't think that this book was needed. I enjoyed reading it because, again, it's like a wrap up for all of them, but I don't think it added anything to the series. And I know that a lot of people who read the entire series have skipped out on reading this because there are a lot of bad reviews regarding The Legacy. The book is divided into 4 parts to finalize the 4 couples story. Each part ended abruptly and I was kind of left like, what the heck just happened? I would say 3 out of the 4 characters had issues that they shouldn't have been having with everything that they went through in their individual books. That's one of the main issues that I had with The Legacy. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. It doesn't really add anything to the series. If you want to read it, go for it, but don't really expect anything. It was just meh for me, fell flat. The next book that I read, I actually finished it 2 nights ago, and it's Layla by Colleen Hoover. This book is told from the male character's perspective, which is Leeds. When Leeds meets Layla, he's absolutely intrigued by her. They end up falling in love, but they suffer an attack which threatens Layla's life. After the attack, Layla's never really the same. She's a completely different person than the person that Leeds fell in love with, and in order to try to save their relationship, he takes Layla to the bed and breakfast where they met. But things start to occur in that bed and breakfast that makes Leeds question everything he's ever known and everything he's ever believed. This is a paranormal type of book. I think this is the first time Colleen Hoover has dipped into that genre, which I absolutely love. I think that she definitely needs to write more books in that genre because she did such a great job with this book. I'm not gonna lie, while I was reading the first half of the book, I was a little bit scared. Like, all the lights in my apartment were on. It's not a super scary book. You might be a little spooked out in the first half, but then as the book progresses, it's really not all that spooky anymore. It turns into more of a romance. I will say that I did not like the main character Leeds. There was a lot of gaslighting happening in this book from Leeds' character towards Layla, and even though at the end you figure out why and it's like, oh, okay, I kind of get it, but you're still a douche for everything that you did because you did all that before you knew the truth of what was going on. So I lost a lot of respect for Leeds. Even though I knew why he did everything that he did, at the end of the book I was still looking at him kind of side-eye. Layla and Willow, on the other hand, absolutely loved. I really enjoyed reading the book for them. Not so much for Leeds, but I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I highly recommend for you guys to read this book, especially if you're into Colleen Hoover. It's a lot different than her other books. Keep that in mind. And the ending definitely throws you in for a loop. When I finished reading this book, I was like, what the hell did I just read? It took me a few days to process it, honestly. Highly recommend. Enjoyed reading this book so much. I started reading this book at 7 p.m. and I didn't finish it till like midnight. Y'all know I like to be in bed by 10 o'clock. I fought my sleep so hard so I could finish this book. This next book, you may already know my thoughts and opinions on it if you watched my last reading vlog, but the next book that I read was Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover. This book basically follows a young mother who has been recently released from prison. She spent 5 years in prison. When she's released from prison, she goes back into the town where the tragedy happened to try to see if she could be in her daughter's life. That's where she meets Ledger. Ledger is the only person in Kanna's life who is willing to give her the time of day to explain herself and to explain what exactly landed her in jail. It's a beautiful story that captures how people grieve differently, how some people are more likely to forgive than others, the love, the romance. Everything in this book is 10 out of 10. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved this book. This book was definitely a roller coaster for my emotions, but I absolutely loved every second of it. I loved all the characters, even the side characters, which sometimes is very strange for me. It takes a lot for me to actually connect with side characters and find that they actually add to the plot of the book. If you haven't read Reminders of Him, please read it. You'll love it. The final book that I want to talk about is The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. So I actually haven't finished this book. I started it and I'm on page 121. I'm still in the first half of the book and I'm enjoying it so far. This book is highly recommended by a lot of you guys. If you don't know what this book is about, it basically follows Lucy and Joshua. They are work colleagues who despise one another and they're up for the same promotion. So essentially they have to prove themselves and the best man or woman will win the promotion. They make a bet that if one of them wins the promotion, the the other person who loses has to quit their job. Throughout them competing for this promotion and throughout them spending time with one another, they realize that they don't really hate each other, but they're insanely attracted to one another. I did watch the movie, which made the first 50 pages of this book drag for me. It wasn't until after the first 50 pages that I actually became invested in the book, and I'm loving the main characters Lucy and Joshua so far. Once I finish this book, I'll give you guys an update on what I thought about it, of course. Maybe I'll leave the rating in the comments below. But those are all the books that I read for the month of May. Let me know in the comments below if you read any of these books. Also, let me know your favorite book that you read this month in the comments below. I would love to know if you had any 5-star reads. Really hope you guys enjoyed watching. If you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. I would love to have you a part of my channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye guys.